to our first topic of the day. The National Emergency Management Agency says it has deployed its officials in 15 high-risk states to further enlighten residents on the impending floods and the need to relocate from flood-prone areas. The agency says that victims of the tragedy in Mokwa, Niger State, lived in gully areas and were caught unawares by the recent flooding disaster in the state, despite official warnings. Head of the press unit at NEMA, Manzo Ezekiel, said the states include Kogi, Imo, Enugu, Adamawa, Taraba, Borno, Zamfara, Katsina, and the Federal Capital Territory. He lamented that many of the victims of the May 23 flooding built their residences in gully areas prone to floods. The flood in Mokwa, a commercial hub in Niger State, claimed over 200 lives, with hundreds of others declared missing. Unfortunately, we don't have a person from the Nigerian National Emergency Management Agency on the program. The person we have on the program is High Chief Johnson Chukwu, who is here to discuss some other subjects. Driver's licenses and number plates, whose costs have now been increased by the Joint Tax Board, and the implications of that for the Nigerian citizen. If you have to register your number plates, you have to pay more. If you have to get a driver's license, you have to pay more. A driver's license for private persons, 3 years is now 15,000. For 5 years is now 21,000. If it is tricycle, the cost has also gone up. If you want special number plates, the cost has also gone up. At the same time, there's also the concern that has been expressed by analysts about the cost of the domestic debt of states and local government councils. It's now about 4.4 trillion naira. And some analysts have expressed concerns that, look, this will create fiscal instability at the level of the local councils. This will raise problems about the failure, the ability of the local councils and states to effectively manage their balance sheets. And it also raises concerns about borrowing as a long-term solution. People say, yes, you can borrow, but must borrowing be a long-term solution? The states, the local councils, they have responsibilities, even the federal government, that they don't have to borrow to the quantum that they will ordinarily, align themselves with. But these are the two major topics for which you have been invited. There may be other ones that I can throw into the pool. But let me start by saying the Joint Tax Board, had told us through the committee that reviewed the 4 bills relating to taxation in Nigeria, that the objective of the Taiwo Oyedele Committee, was not to increase taxation, but simply to expand the tax base, to even make things easier for the Nigerian citizen. Because if you expand, you are not necessarily punishing people. But now we have the Joint Tax Board. One of the 4 bills was Joint Tax Board bill, now saying people have to pay more for driver's licenses, for registration of vehicles, and that we may even have to pay more for those people who need specialized, customized plate numbers. Government is not excluded, but this was not the original promise. What else would they ask for more tax on? And we'll begin to think that, look, President Tinubu said he was going to modernize the taxation regime in Nigeria, but this is no longer looking like modernization. It's looking like a revenue tax drive.
Okay, thank you, Your Excellency, Dr. Ruben Abati. Probably you need to get a special plate number with Dr. Abati, and that will cost about 400,000 naira. I said to you about 400,000 naira.
Where will I get that from?
Anyway, the reality is that I looked at their excuse or their reason for increasing the tariff for driver's license and vehicle plate numbers. And they say they've added additional security features, that this additional security feature is costing them some money, and then that general cost of producing those driver's license and plate numbers have also increased. These are sound logical statements, so I wouldn't take that away from them. The reality what we're facing today is that virtually every cost component in the economy has increased, which is coming from a larger macroeconomic problem of high inflation rates. So we have to live with that. The question becomes, with that increment in cost, should it be borne by private sector households or should it be borne by government? Somebody has to bear the cost. So if we say, look, these are not subsidized services, then you will expect that the cost will increase. So I look at it from that perspective that, look, providing driver's license and providing vehicle plate numbers are not subsidized services. So if we have sat down and watched costs increase the country, we have an inflation rate of about 24%. And then average inflation rate last year was 34.18% last year. So, and then we're now dealing with about 23.21% this year. I mean, last inflation figures. So the implication of that is that every item being produced in the country would have increased its cost of production. So we have to relate with that. The questions are, should the government absorb that cost? Should it be a subsidy to the citizens, or should it be passed on? My approach, in as much as I have argued that the government should not burden us so much with additional costs, tax burden, that we should not tax the few who are paying taxes to death. But if you look at the components that are being taxed this around, or whose costs are being adjusted to be cost reflective or cost recovery, then one would say that there are costs that can be absorbed or that can be borne by those who are going to pay it. Take, for instance, big men like you that need to pay 400,000 naira to get their special plate numbers. If you are not the type that is so ego-driven that you want to answer Ruben 1, Ruben 2, Ruben 3, why would you want to pay that? The cost of vehicle plate numbers for commercial and private vehicles is 30,000 naira. That is based on the new tariff. For driver's license, it's 21,000 naira for 5 years and 15,000 naira for 3 years. Then, for those who want what they call off-season plate numbers, so maybe you want XYZ777, you pay 150,000 naira instead of 30,000 naira. So those who are ego-driven could actually decide to pay for that. But I think it's a cost that government does not necessarily need to bear. I would look at it from that perspective. That does not take away the fact that, look, government should not, as a matter of policy, overtax us, which is some of what we're witnessing today, where they are increasing tariffs, where they are not costs, they are unavoidable costs. They are costs that you must bear. Take, for instance, costs like stamp duty on bank transactions. I do not see any reason why somebody should pay stamp duty to do a transaction, because you are not registering the transaction. As you are not good, you don't need to go to the legal system to register your withdrawals or payments. And some of the taxes you are levying are based on, not on profit. Because if it's profit, you say, look, value has been created, government needs to appropriate that values. So some instances where government has imposed taxes, they are eroding the capital base of private sector operators. But this is not the case. This is a consumption that is largely incurred by those who have the capacity to incur it. Driver's license. If you don't have a car, if you're not driving, you don't need a driver's license. Plate number, you need to buy a car. Today, what's the minimum cost of a car? I'm not sure you can get any car less than 1 million naira. So if you buy a 1 million naira car, you need 30,000 naira to register it. I do not think it's excessive. So these are not the kind of costs that I would say the government pull back. Because if they pull back, they have to absorb those costs.
Well, no, but what Nigerians are saying is that in the context of desperate economic hardship, this looks like further compounding the hardship of the people. It's not about the quantum, it's actually about the very fact of it itself.
Yes, which is, you see, there's a saying that sometimes we have misplaced anger. We should look at what are those items government is currently taxing. The government wanted to increase VAT. Good thing the National Assembly pushed back on that, which was for me unconscionable at this point. There are some items that are being taxed today. The government has just imposed or about to impose a tariff for adverts by fuel stations, and they want to charge them about 750,000 naira from about 15,000 naira or so per filling station. That cost will be passed on to the average consumer when you are buying fuel. Those are hidden costs that the government does not need to charge, because it does not cost government anything to say, look, they are not the one putting the signages. So one of the things we should be looking at is that when we want to complain about government taxes, we must localize it at taxes that are not appropriate, taxes that are not fair, taxes that add to our tax burden, and particularly taxes that are not progressive. Because some of the taxes, like when you talk of the stamp duty I mentioned, it doesn't matter whether you're a billionaire or you are a poor person. When you do a transaction, you pay tax stamp duty on it.
Same billionaire, you are pointing to me. You should have used the right hand to say you are a poor person. You should have pointed to me.
But you know you can't hide. Go to if you has no hiding place.
No. I'm in 30 days, make one pay.
Yes, we know.
I'm a regular guy.
We know, like that Thai Salary said, look, there are 30 days people who are billionaires.
Well, I don't know about that. But please, guy.
Okay, so what we're just saying is that there are taxes that we should complain about. So that when we do that, it becomes easy for us to push the government to not impose additional taxes where they should not. Every tax must be progressive in nature, which means those who have the capacity to bear that tax burden should be the one the tax should be passed on to. Flat taxes punish the poor, which is why I'm referring to things like stamp duty tax, that punish the poor. But taxes like an increase in the costs of getting a driver's license, people that get driver's license are those who drive. Taxes of registering, you're getting your plate number, paying 30,000 naira for your plate number. It is for those who have bought vehicles. And bear in mind that the 30,000 naira will not fill up your tank. So it's a cost that I think are affordable by those who drive. And because it was also progressive, people who said, look, I want a special number. I want this number 222-555, which they call off-season number. They pay 150,000. Those who are bigger men, who have big stomach, that can absorb so much of consumption, they want their number to be written as Ruben 1, Ruben 2, about 3, about 4. You pay 400,000 to get that. So for me, I don't have any problem with that. Where I have a problem is that those taxes that are coming from the back door, that are not progressive in nature, that impose flat burden on those of us who can afford to pay, at the same rate it imposes on those of you who can afford to pay.
Okay, I get your point. Anyway, how about the states and local governments that were now being told as of December 2024 were owing over 4 trillion naira? I thought what the Tinubu administration had told us is that, look, states have paid off their debts, local governments have excellent balance sheet, and now we're being told, by the central bank, in fact, was it not the central bank, that these states are owing a lot of money. The bulk of it to banks, commercial banks, merchant banks, over 59,000, over 41%, 59%, over 41%, being owed, to the Central Bank of Nigeria. I thought we were told that the debts have been wiped off. And now analysts are warning about fiscal instability, mismanagement of a balance sheet at the subnational levels, and also, the implications of this. One, the fact that the states are non-viable. They are not productive centers, and that, the states and the local councils need to do something else. What do you think is responsible for this? I thought from the removal of fuel subsidy, we made more money, everybody got more money, everybody is supposed to be happy. And now we are being told that these subnationals are in serious debt.
Well, Ruben, there are a couple of things that we have to look at or interrogate when I saw the figures. That the states and local governments are owing the central bank owing the banking system. That is the commercial bank and the central bank about 4.09 trillion.
01 trillion.
4.1 trillion.
Okay.
4.1 trillion naira. Of that amount, about 2.41 trillion naira is owed to commercial and deposit money banks. Well, about 1.68 trillion is owed to the central bank.
Central bank.
Okay. The central bank debt, the bank debt to the banks, for me, is not a problem. The simple reason why it's not a problem is that most of these central bank, those loans classified as central bank lending to the state government are federal government or multilateral lending to the state governments. Some of them are intervention funding, where the federal government is intervening, a state government volunteers to be an anchor borrower under the anchor borrower program or the commercial agriculture credit scheme. So if a state government volunteers to become that, they now guarantee, and that debt will be on their balance sheet. Then you have other instances like some of the federal government health schemes, some of the UN-funded soft loans that are designed to go to the state government, because the state government as subnational cannot borrow directly from multilateral agencies. So the loan is channeled through the bank, through the federal government, through the central bank, and then they may get, because the central bank hold the FAC account of the states. So disbursement is done as source. So I don't have a problem with that, provided those, because there are some guidelines for assessing those loans. And most of those loans are intervention loans that we are targeted at some level of poverty alleviation, improving agriculture, improving healthcare. The problem I have is with the 2.41 trillion naira that you owe to the commercial banks. And this is the reason why it is very important we interrogate that further. When state governments borrow from the banks, they do not comply with some of the stringent rules that are imposed by SEC for borrowing. Some of the rules imposed by SEC means you cannot borrow more than 1/3 of your previous year's 12 months revenue that are unencumbered by loans or expenses after adjusting for your loans. So you can't borrow more than that. But when they go straight to the banks, they can borrow limitlessly. Some of them are soft loans. And there are also some underhand in some instances where the pricing of the loans are not, the full pricing of loans are padded up. And I can tell that without any fear of contradiction. There are states in the past where the cost of the loan is padded, and then some benefits are passed on to executive members of the government. So inherent in government borrowing from the state government, beyond that, there are short-term loans, and their pricing is expensive. So if the states actually want to borrow, they must subject themselves to this discipline of going to the capital market, which will compel them to ensure that the money they borrow are invested in specific projects that would have gone through some scrutiny. Because if you go to borrow from the capital market, you must define the purpose of use. And that purpose of use, you must adhere to it. SEC will at regular intervals come to inspect that the projects you've listed upon which you borrowed were implemented. So when the governments go to the banks to borrow, they circumvent these requirements that compel them to extract value for money, and they make the deployment of those loans very verbose, that we are not able to effectively determine if deployment or effective use of those funds. And at the end of the day, they impose debt burdens on their citizens. Beyond that, the other factors we have to consider, like you rightly pointed out, we've seen a major increase in allocation going to the three tiers of government. Between June 2023, when the current administration came on board, and April 2025, the three tiers of government had shared about 29 trillion naira. At the same time, if you consider the debt burden, debt obligation of the state governments as at the end of December 2023, and what it was at the reference date you are referring to, December 2024, we've seen an increase of 1.4 trillion naira. At the end of December 2023, total subnational debt, state and local government debt, was about 10 trillion naira. At the end of December last year, it was 11.3 trillion naira. So we've seen an increase in debt of the three tiers of the subnationals when their revenue has increased astronomically. So it then borders on what is the level of prudence of economic use, economic development at the subnational level.
Okay, one clarification that I will need from you as an expert in this line of analysis. Is there any connection between this domestic debt that now stands at 4 trillion and the $3.4 billion, I think, that was paid back to the IMF, being money borrowed by Nigeria on the basis of COVID-19? We were told, oh, that had been paid back by April 2025. Is there any connection? And what are the implications of these subnationals still owing so much in terms of domestic debt? At a time when the matter about local government financial autonomy has not even been resolved, as we have seen in some of the states, including Osun.
Okay, if you disaggregate the subnational debt as of December 2023, and that as of December 2024, you will observe that in December 2023, total subnational foreign currency debt, the standard debt was $5.8 billion. It was $4 billion at the end of last year. So there have been some decline in terms of external debt owed by, it was 5.8 against 4.4 billion dollars. So we've seen a decline in subnational or state governments' external debt, which can be attributed to the liquidation of the IMF-funded intervention related to COVID. So we've seen that. But at the local level, the local currency, we've seen an astronomical increase. Okay, and that's why the increment we've seen in the total debt, remember that foreign debt, external debt dropped from 5.8 to 4.4 billion dollars, while as total debt between those periods increased from 10 trillion to 11.3 trillion. So most of the increment we saw was in local currency borrowing. And a significant part of that is related to their borrowing from the banks.
But so what should these states do, and even the federal government, to make sure that they maintain a healthy balance sheet? What do you think the problem is? Is it due to incompetence or due to inability to focus on the major economic priorities?
Well, I think part of it, both are possible contributory factors. One is that we have some state government, with all due respect to them. I'm not saying you must have knowledge of finance, but it helps in running a business, including the business of government. Having a reasonable knowledge of finance helps in running a business, including the business of governance. So that's one aspect. So you can attribute part of it to lack of knowledge of finance.
No, I prefer the word incompetence.
You're the one saying that, but I prefer to say lack of deep knowledge of financial management. Then you have to deal with the other aspect, which is there are no checks and balances at the state government level. Most state government do not even have the debt management office. One of the requirements by DMO for them to approve your local currency bond application is you must have a debt management office. So you must have a department in your state that manages your debt, that says you have gotten to a non-sustainable debt level, that the debt you have borrowed will be paid over this period of time. These are the monthly obligations you have. This is that you must have your balance sheet. So you have instances with no such thing. And then you also now have, unfortunately for us, we have a convergence of the legislature and the executive in most states that there is no check and balance that will ensure that budget is implemented, that when the government wants to borrow, that the legislator would appropriately query the purpose of that borrowing and ensure that they monitor utilization. So those are some of the problems we are having. Some of them are systemic in nature, some of them are knowledge-based, and some of them are cases of recklessness, where you have instances where people, those who knew what to do, and they decide to breach it because there is nobody controlling them.
Okay, I get your point. One final subject before, I wrap this up. And it has to do with the situation in the United States. In the last 72 hours, the relationship between Elon Musk, CEO of Tesla, SpaceX, and President Trump has deteriorated dramatically. Despite the fact that when Elon Musk was leaving the government, 130 days after, on May 31st, Friday, President Trump was saying, he will always be around, he will always come back. It was an amicable departure, and he was saying he's one of us. But they have now parted ways on the basis of what you call the big, beautiful bill, the spending and taxation cut, bill, which, Musk insists is an abomination and that, it's not in the best interest of the United States. He calls it a denigrating abomination. However, the bigger issue is about the relationship between businessmen and politicians. One of the things in my head about this, what Trump calls, what Musk calls disgusting abomination, is how people in business go into politics, they go into government, and they get their hands burnt. I know the ones in Nigeria, they just give money to politicians. They think they can buy government. But how do we draw the line between government and business and the bigger issues of politics and governance? You are in business, so I don't know whether tomorrow you will go into politics, or you will also do the Nigerian way and donate money to politicians who will come up with policies that can favor your business. How do we unpack that conundrum?
Okay, Ruben, is a very interesting development. In the first place, we have to hold one factor constant. The two of them are extremely eccentric personalities. Both Donald Trump and Elon Musk are extremely eccentric. Those are people whose behaviors tend towards the fringes of human behavior. So we must recognize that.
Saying that they are...
Say it yourself. Say it yourself. So, them falling apart, for me, was not strange. Such extremely unstable personalities really can't coexist and cohabit for a long time. That's one factor. The second factor we take away, we have to bring to the box is that I agree with Musk that the bill, the tax cut bill, is not appropriate for giving the physical condition of the United States. I made a presentation at our quarterly economic review, and I've done first, I think that was second week of January and second week of April. And I emphasized that, look, this bill, or Donald Trump's intention to reduce taxes and grant more subsidies, will
defense spending,
yes,
specifically,
will certainly throw American deficit into bigger hole, and that could have unstable effect on the global economy because it will lead to printing of dollar. Or the government of the U.S. will have to borrow more by issuing treasury bills. Either way, you either print more dollars and create global inflation pressure, or you borrow additionally and then drive up interest rates and constrain developing countries from borrowing. So any of those things will have negative global macroeconomic effect. So I'm on the same page with Elon Musk. But the questions are, his approach is a different thing. And like Donald Trump said, he was part of that he knew every part of the bill. And there's a saying, I can't remember who said it, was one politician from Oyo State, under Obasanjo government, that said, you do not shout at the person you can whisper to. So if Donald Trump was in a position until recently to advise against the bill, and given the level of trust that Trump had on him at the onset of the administration, he could have effectively killed that bill or adjusted it or moderated it in a way that will fit the purpose for which he's complaining. So that's my take on it. What I said, look, I started by saying the two of them are eccentric people, some people with some level of stable character, and it's impossible for them to work together. But looking at the larger issue, which is what's the nature of this bill, and then the question you asked about private sector people working with the public sector, I do not think the issues, unless you want to bring in up the threat by Donald Trump to cancel some of the contracts, government contracts they're giving to Elon Musk companies. That's where private sector working with government will come in. But unfortunately for the US government, like when my son was sharing with me his knowledge of the satellites, he said most of the satellites launched by America are currently launched by Donald Trump's Elon Musk companies. So US, as it stands today, unless they have to nationalize the Elon Musk companies, they really cannot push him. And that's why you said he will start decommissioning.
No, they can deport him. back to South Africa.
Yeah, when they deport him, he will decommission those satellites.
He's a South African American. He can be deported.
When they do that, they know the implication of that. He will decommission those satellites, and today, China and Russia will have superiority in terms of area conflict over the U.S. So U.S. is constrained. But the questions I ask myself is that, should private sector people jump into politics? You know that, right, in most instances, they don't go hand in hand, which is why my company, Carriers, took a decision of, we're not going to be involved in any government contracts. We're not going to get involved in funding a government contract. We don't want to deal with government other than obeying regulation. Particularly, governments in Nigeria, because I can tell you for free, they are highly, highly responsible, and I say that without contradiction. If I'm pushed,
Are you saying that the Tinubu administration is irresponsible? No, let's be specific.
We took a
because we're in the context of, midterm assessment and all that. Are you saying
you want to put me on the spot? Okay, we took the decision long before Tinubu came into government that we're not going to deal with the government. So because we're not dealing with even any government, even before he came into power, we do not know whether he abides or complies with contract obligations or not. We don't even want to know. We don't get involved, not at the federal level, not at the state government level, not at the local government level. We had chopped enough beans, like we say in the banking palace, from funding government contracts. And in all instances, we came out with the short end of the stick. We drew our line and said, look, enough of government. If we don't have enough business in the private sector to sustain us, we go to our villages.
Well, except that the Tinubu administration has been saying that it is interested in foreign direct investment, foreign portfolio investment, and also is committed to promoting the private sector in Nigeria and creating an enabling business environment. Don't you think you are shortchanging yourself by having an old mindset to say, oh, I do not want to go near government?
Okay, let me give an instance. I was about driving to the studio now. A friend of mine called me and said he is going to bid for a government contract. He wants to see if my company can bid. And I told him that, I started laughing. I said, unfortunately, John, I took a decision long ago that we don't participate in government contracts. The lack of participation in government contract does not mean we will not invest in Nigeria. We will invest in Nigeria as private sector businesses. We are not going to co-invest with any government. We are not going to go into public-private partnership with government. If the government creates the environment with the appropriate regulation to allow private sector to invest, we will invest. But we will invest, and what we're saying, that government should back off from getting involved in running businesses. Create the environment and let the private sector build those commercially viable projects. Let the commercial private sector do the investment, which is in tandem with the government saying, look, we want to attract foreign capital, we want to attract local capital. The key thing about attracting capital is that what capital needs a conducive environment to prosper. Capital does not need to co-invest with government, because when you co-invest with government, you realize that you are taking the biggest risk you have is an unknown quantity of what the next government will do or what new members of the current government will do to your investment. So for us, we'll do investment in Nigeria. We believe in Nigeria. We believe opportunities are here. We are making investment. We'll continue to make investment in Nigeria. In fact, one of my businesses will be opening one of the investment in Delta on June 12th. So, but that does not negate our decision not to lend to government, not to do government contracts, and not to co-invest with government.
Anyway, on that note, I would like to thank you very much, Chief Johnson Chukwu, for joining us on today's edition of This Day Live, the Sunday Talk Show.